experience end up being good things in our life. In other words, sometimes the things that are curses in our life end up being our blessing. The great example of that is obviously if you know the story of the gospel, Jesus was crucified on a Friday. That was a bad thing. But now we call that Good Friday because it became a good thing because we understand now that he was dying to forgive us of our sins and shed his blood for that. And so we can have a negative experience, but have a positive impact on our life. And we do believe that Jesus has done that. And because he's done that, it gives us hope that no matter what happens to us, all things are used for the good of those who love God. And so we trust him. And you always have to go back to the example, obviously, of Jesus and the cross. But you also see this displayed in stories throughout, like the Old Testament and New Testament, such as Joseph when he got thrown in a pit and then got put in prison for a crime he didn't commit. And then he ended up saving his own family's lives who treated him that way. I had a friend years ago who died in 1998, and he was a youth speaker and a youth pastor, just an incredible man of God, somebody that I would say in my life that I've come in contact with that I would say, that guy knew God in a way that I don't know God. And I remember watching his life and getting to know him. And when I got to know him, he had had polio as a kid, had cystic fibrosis as an adult, and he was on an iron lung, I think, like 3 times a day. And as I got to know him and hear him speak, and this was not just something he spoke about, but it actually was true, he would refer to his disease as a gift from God. That's how he referred to it, because he says because of that gift, he knew God the way that he knew God. And sometimes we don't see things that are going on in our life in that same manner, but that's the way. So I even read a story just this past week where this guy ends up, he's a believer, he gets cancer. It eventually took his life. But as I was reading the story, one of the things that struck me was he said the greatest thing that ever happened to him was first knowing Jesus. But the second thing was that he got cancer. And the reason he said that is because cancer put everything in perspective in his life. And so it was actually the cancer that became the catalyst, that pivotal circumstance in his life that actually caused him to turn to Christ. And so we can have these horrible things happen to us, and in the midst of them, they can become a curse, can become a blessing. Just like on the flip side, your blessings can be your curse as well. You can be blessed in such a way, and we'll actually talk about that next week. Your blessings can be something that becomes a curse in your life. So this section is what we're going to dive in today, and it's full of comparisons and superlatives. And by superlative, I mean that it's saying this one thing is better than another thing. Doesn't mean the other thing doesn't have value or that can't be good. It just means sometimes one thing is better than the other thing. Like, I might say to you, chocolate is better than vanilla. And you might argue. But in one sense, we could prove a point that, hey, maybe chocolate is better than vanilla. So as we walk through that, pay attention to the superlatives that we will look at as we walk through it. So verse 1a gives us the first superlative, and it says this: a good name is better than precious ointment. A good name is a good character, a good reputation. And it's actually an interesting passage because there's a play on words in the Hebrew here. The word for name is Shem, which is, Noah had sons. One of them was named Shem. Shem means name. It's a word that we get the Semitic people, the people of the name. That's the Jewish people. And then the word for ointment is actually Shemin, which is just adding a consonant on the end of the word. And so it's a play on words. But what he's saying is precious as an ointment or cosmetic or perfume would be, that he's saying that having a good name is better than having great cosmetics to make you look good. In other words, your outward appearance is not as important as who you are inwardly, and it's not as important as your reputation. What is a good name? A name is that you have a reputation that is good around the people that know you. In Song of Solomon, when Solomon's writing, in chapter 1, verse 3, he writes, And he starts off, and it's the lady is the wife is talking, or the soon-to-be wife. They're not married at this point, but she says this. She says, "Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth." I'm sure that's how all of you talk about your husbands, and say, "For your love is better than wine, and your anointing oils are fragrant." And then she says, "Your name is oil poured out." In other words, what she loves about him is his character, is his reputation, who he is on the inside, and that he's like an expensive perfume. And so what she respects about him is who he is, and his character has a sweet smell. In other words, if I'm teaching Song of Solomon chapter 1, what I talk about is what you need to have is the kind of character that smells good. And like you don't have a stinky character. You know anybody who's got a stinky reputation? You don't want to have that. And so what Solomon's writing about in Ecclesiastes is say, having a good name is more valuable, should be more valuable to you because it's better than having great cosmetics. Don't just work on the outside, but work on the inside. Then he goes on to say this: the day of death is better than, it's implied, than the day of birth. So here's a question for you. Do you agree with Solomon? Is the day of death to you better than the day of birth? And I think a lot of us, if we're honest, we go, even when I study this, I go, okay, wait a minute, Solomon. The day of death is better than the day of birth. How could that be? The day of birth and the day of death, obviously, we would agree is they're both impactful. The day of birth is a day that's filled with human potential. You know, you have a new kid, they got all this potential. What are they going to be? What are they going to do? And so you get excited about that. But he says the day of death is better than just having that potential. The day of death is better because it brings a seriousnness to life that can be easily overlooked. In other words, he's saying how it benefits you the day of death is that it causes you to move past frivolous living into serious living. Now, that doesn't mean, he's not meaning, okay, so we should go through life gloomy. That's not the idea. So, because you would think, well, we're going to talk about death, that sounds really depressing. That sounds really gloomy. But that's not really his point. His point is that the day of death helps you to keep things in perspective. As James writes in his letter, he says, you know, life is short. It's like a vapor. It's here and then it's gone. And what that does is it reminds you, hey, my days on earth are numbered. I'm not going to live here forever. And so you begin to take your days more serious. Here's one of the things that's going on right now in our country. Coronavirus, and around the world, it's been announced today it's a global pandemic. And so all over the world, people are dealing with this. So what coronavirus is doing is causing people to think about the brevity of life. It's causing people who may not have been thinking seriously about life and death, as this moves around and if we have people in our community start dying. I mean, because there's one thing to have people in China dying. That doesn't cause you to think about life. But I promise you, if we start having people in the hospital that you know, they start dying of coronavirus, you know what's going to happen? You're going to think about that because you're going to end up probably going to funerals. And here's what happens when you go to a funeral. You look at somebody and they're in the casket. What does it tell you? One day you're going to be in the casket. And so it brings a seriousness to life. So what Solomon's saying, this is a good thing for us because it causes you to consider the things that are most important. And so as you consider this, I think there's a connection also between both of these superlatives. A good name is better than precious ointment or perfume. The day of death is better than the day of birth. If you neglect keeping a good name until the day you die, then you actually ruin the potential that you had as a human at birth. In other words, you want to keep a good name as you live because it's valuable, because one day you're going to die. And if you can keep a good name till the day you die, then you're living up to the potential that God created you to have. In other words, are you living for the purpose in which God created you? Are you living for your own purpose? Or maybe you're just in existence mode. You're not living really on purpose at all. You're just kind of here. And so God's purpose for your life is not for you just to exist. He has created you on purpose to make a difference in this world. And so are you living up to that? So Why is that important? Verse 2. It is better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting. For this is the end of all mankind, and the living will lay it to heart. So, what's he saying? It's better for you to go to a funeral than it is for you to go to a party. Everybody agree? You know, you walk in tonight and go, you know what? I like funerals a lot better than I like parties. Probably not thinking that. He's not saying that funerals are funner. He's saying they're better for you. And the reason they're better for you is going back to the previous verse. He says, you go to a party, what do? You have a tendency to live frivolously. You have a tendency to be in that moment and don't think about anything. You just go through the party and you're all about having fun. But when you go to a funeral, it has a sobering effect on you. It has the effect of making you get really serious. Like I said, the casket's there, and you may love the person in it, but what are you thinking in your head? You're thinking, I'm going to be there one day. It's why if I'm going to preach the gospel, it's a lot easier to preach it at the funeral than it is at the party. Because at the party, nobody wants to hear that. Nobody wants to think about eternity. Nobody wants to think about being held accountable to God. Nobody wants to hear it. But at a funeral, even people who haven't stepped foot in a church, that has a sobering effect because it forces you to think about eternity. It forces you to think about life after death. And so one day, I'll be there. So what's that going to be like for me? It says, you know, are you living with dying in mind? Or are you just living like you're going to live forever the way you are here on earth? I know as I've gotten older, this is closer for me. You know, when you're younger, you go, oh, I got plenty of time. Now I'm thinking, you know, if I live to the average age of American, ooh, that's not a lot of time. Because how fast is it going by? And I'm like, ooh, that's a sobering moment. And what that does for you is it helps you to take living more seriously. Like I said, not gloomy. It doesn't mean like you're a stick in the mud. It just means that you know that you're going to be held accountable. Hebrews 9:27 says this. And just as it is appointed for a man to die once, and after that comes the judgment. And what that does is it goes, okay, you know, when I go to the party, I need to keep God in mind. I need to keep what I do in mind because God's going to hold me accountable for what I do. And so if that's true and I'm going to die, then I might die sooner than I think. So I need to live a little more seriously than I am. And so what it causes you to do is to live on purpose. You know, death has a clarifying effect on our perspective about life. It's for the person who is living life intoxicated, it can be a sobering thing to see someone die or to find out that we have a disease or we have coronavirus going around. And what that does is causes you to listen. It causes you to stop. And that's why he says, hey, check this out. It's better to go to the funeral than it is to go to the party. For all of mankind, we're all headed here. We're from the dust, but we're going back to the dust. And so we lay it to heart, meaning we feel it. We don't just think about it, we feel it. And it begins to affect our will and our emotions and the way that we go about life. He goes on to add it like this. Sorrow is better than laughter. Now, when you came in, we'll say this again. Would you have said that? Would you have agreed with Solomon and said, you know what, I think sorrow is better than laughter? Or would you say, I think laughter is better? Why? Why does he say this? Because we have a tendency to live with illusions. And sorrow, although it's fun, it can be unprofitable for our life. He even goes on to say, you know, for by sadness of the face, the heart is made glad. So the question becomes, how does a sad face lead to a glad heart? How does the reflection of emotion in my face impact my emotional state on the inside? Sorrowful moments that lead to life change and wisdom are of greater value to us eternally. In other words, when I told you the story about the guy who had cancer, and the cancer was the very thing that led him to Christ, which ultimately saved his life for eternity, it was a sad face that ended up making him have a glad heart. That is Solomon's point. He says, we go through life and we pursue this gladness and this happiness, but a lot of times it doesn't really help me the way that I really need help. And this doesn't mean that Solomon's saying, you need to quit all the entertainment and the laughter. He's just saying it doesn't have the value for you for eternity and for the things that matter that you think it does. And so I think he would say, look, enjoy life, because he's talked about that. But he's saying, look, there's a place for having enjoyment. But you don't stay there, because you need to know that life does come to an end and that there is difficulty, because understanding the brevity of life has an impact on how I live today. So here's a question that I ask myself routinely about my relationships and circumstances. If the person that maybe I'm at odds with, if they were to die today or to die tomorrow, is what's really going on in my life right now with them really that important? I mean, does it really matter what I'm mad about? In other words, if the person in your life that you're having some conflict with, if they died tomorrow, because we all do it, I'm mad at them, man, I'm going to make them pay. I'm going to give them the silent treatment, all right? I'm going to be mean to them. If they were to die tomorrow, would you get to that point and go, you know what? I should have let that go. I should have made that right. Because once they're dead, you can't. In other words, so I routinely ask myself this. My sons would tell you at times we'd be doing something, and and I might say to them something like that. I say, so if I died tomorrow, you okay with that? And they're like, looking at me like, that's harsh. I'm like, it's a clarifying statement. And so that's the thing that I think it's important to ask yourself. Really, is it that big of a deal? Does it really matter when it comes to eternity? And most of the time, what the answer I find out is no. Let it go. Make it right. Psalm 90:12 says, Lord, teach us to number our days that we might gain a heart of wisdom. We use that with our children's ministry. We have the jar with the marbles in it, and each marble stands for a week. I think it's 936 weeks when your child's born to the time that they're 18, and you pull out a marble each week. That's what the point is. The point is they're not going to be at your house forever. So in the weeks that you're pulling them out, what are you doing with your time? You know what that's causing you to do? It's causing you to do what Solomon's talking about. It's like take the time that you have, take it seriously. Don't waste your time with your kids. And teach me to number my days. Like if God gave you the day that you're going to die, right now. He just said, here's the day you're going to die. And you mark that on your calendar. I promise you would look at your calendar much different than you do now, because you would be numbering your days. You go, well, I ain't got this. So you would get to the things that matter the most. And so it helps us to live wisely. So as we look at verse 4, he goes on to say, the heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of mirth. Meaning the wise person knows when they go to the funeral, it's really a good thing for them. The fools love to go to the parties. They love to go to the events, because then they just kind of get into an illusion, and they're not living in reality. In other words, the reason I called this whole series with Ecclesiastes the reality check, because that's what it is. This is Solomon go, I want you to have a reality check about how you're living your life. Because some of us are living like we're not going to be held accountable, like we're going to live forever. We're living like God doesn't exist. And he's saying, the reality check is, you're going to go to a funeral, and when you go, it's going to set in on you. And what he's saying is carry that in your heart. He's not saying don't enjoy life. He's saying this is part of life and that you need to live with them. And if you're wise, you will live with this and understand it. So in verse 5, he goes on to say, it is better for a man to hear the rebuke of the wise than hear the song of fools. Then he says, why? For as the crackling of thorns under a pot, so is the laughter of fools. This is also vanity. So the superlative here is the rebuke of the wise is better than the party songs. What you hear. In other words, it's better for you to go listen to the preacher or the counselor about your life who tells it to you straight than it is to go to hear the stand-up comedian. It's not that going to hear a stand-up comedian, because I like stand-up. But that ultimately doesn't benefit us. It's hearing the truth. What's actually more beneficial? What do you profit from the most? Hearing the comedian or being corrected? Being corrected is not fun. Who likes somebody telling them that they're doing something wrong? Nobody. But you need somebody in your life who tells you what you need to hear, not just what you want to hear. That's the point. And so he says, look, when you think about who you're listening to, what is it that you're pursuing? So in other words, here's a question we might ask ourselves. Do we gather people around us who tell us what we want to hear, or do we gather people around us who tell us what we need to hear? In other words, the people around you that you seek counsel from, do they tell you the things that you want to hear, and that's actually why you probably seek them out? Or do they tell you the hard things? Are they straight with you? Do they have enough guts to tell you that's wrong and you're off the path? Because you need people in your life to do that. I need people in my life who just tell it to me straight. Matter of fact, Paul writes to Timothy and he tells him this very thing. And this is a problem that a lot of us have. He says, 2 Timothy 4, 1 through 5, here's what he says. I charge you in the presence of God and of Jesus Christ, who is to judge the living and the dead by his appearing in his kingdom. In other words, there's going to be a time you're going to die and you're going to stand in judgment. So he says, Timothy, preach the word, be ready in season and out of season, reprove, rebuke, and exhort with complete patience and teaching. And so in other words, be ready to tell people the truth, whether it's in season or out of season. In other words, everybody's liking it or they don't like it. You tell them the truth. You be ready to correct them, but you do it being patient with them, because people can be slow to learn, teaching them. And here's what he says. He says, here's why. For the time is coming when people will not endure sound teaching, but have itching ears that they will accumulate for themselves teachers to suit their own passions, and will turn away from listening to the truth and wander off into myths. And as for you, always be sober-minded, endure suffering, do the work of an evangelist, fulfill your ministry. What is Paul saying? He said, there's going to be a time where people are going to gather together, and they're going to gather together to hear preachers tell them what they want to hear. Not what they need to hear, but what they want to hear. You know, and I pray to God, like, I will never be that person. But there's a temptation, because when you preach the word, this is what he's saying to you. When you preach the word, and I feel this temptation, you want to be liked and you want to say things where people go, boy, I really enjoyed that. You know, that was wonderful. That doesn't mean that every time you get up, let me say this about preaching too, while I'm on it. Like, preaching is not yelling at you and just always beating you up, and so therefore it's good preaching. Good preaching is declaring what God has done. That's what preaching is. It's telling people the truth about God. That doesn't mean you're beating up people. All this talk about they stepped on my toes. I don't ever come to a sermon or teaching time and go, boy, I just have to step on some toes tonight. I'm not even really sure what that is, other than beating up people with the law most of the time. But I do want to tell people the truth, even when it's not culturally acceptable. Even when people don't say, boy, I really needed to hear that. I want to be faithful to teach it. And look, you need people who tell you the truth. That's what you need in your life. And that's what Solomon's getting at. He said, look, here's why. Because it's like, that's a strange thing. For as the crackling of the thorns under a pot. You ever burned thorn bushes? What do? They crackle. And they get bright real quick. And what happens? Then it's gone. They burn fast. And he says, here's the deal. He said, as the crackling of the thorns under a pot, so is the laughter of fools, and this is also vanity. In other words, going to the party and having fun, hearing the songs, and whooping it up may be fun, but it don't last very long. Look, we've all been to parties. Our culture, people live for the weekend. Weekend's over pretty fast, isn't it? And then you're back in that grind of life. And then you live for the weekend. And then you're like, TGIF, I got to get to Friday. And it's like, it's here and it's gone. It's a chasing after wind. It's smoke. And that's why he's saying, like, the funeral is going to do you more good than that party. It's going to have a long-term effect on you because it'll sober you up. And so the party sounds great, doesn't last. And what the funeral does for you, what the rebuke does for you, it gives you a return on investment. It corrects you. How much do you value having someone who speaks the truth to you? Well, here's a question. Do you have anybody in your life on a regular basis that you allow to correct you? If you don't, you need one. If you are not open to someone correcting you, you're in a dangerous place because your pride is a problem. When's the last time you got mad at somebody because they pointed out something that you were doing wrong? Some of us last night. Look, nobody enjoys that. Nobody wants to be rebuked, corrected. But look, one of the best things you can do, one of the best things I can do is be willing to be straightened out, to be confronted. So verse 7, surely oppression drives the wise into madness, and a bribe corrupts the heart. So this is a parallelism. The word oppression is also the word extortion. Extortion impacts the wise person by making them mad or crazy. In other words, extorting people will make you do dumb things. A smart person, a wise person, can be a dumb person. A wise person can be foolish. Like, just because you know the right thing to do doesn't make you wise. It means you have knowledge of the wise person, but it's the application, the doing of it, that actually makes you wise. There are plenty of people who know the right things but don't do the right things. So they have the knowledge of a wise person, but they don't have the action of one. So they really are a person who has a knowledge of a wise thing, but they act foolish. And he says, if you have this kind of knowledge and you are using oppression and extortion to take from people, then you use threats and you use your power to prosper yourself over other people, then you're not wise. You just know the right thing, but you don't do it. It's the obedience, not just the knowledge, that makes you wise. It even says, bribery itself corrupts the heart. A bribe tempts a man by appealing to his greed. The desire for prosperity makes a person compromise their integrity. That's why wealth can be dangerous. Extortion or bribery can make a wise man become a fool, because then he begins to take advantage of people made in the image of God for his own prosperity, to the point that he loses his integrity, which goes back to the very first verse. A good name is more valuable than expensive perfumes. And so you have to watch your heart when it comes to greed, because greed can even corrupt the wise man. Verse 8, better is the end of the thing than its beginning, and patient in spirit is better than proud in spirit. So you have a couple of superlatives here. The end is better than the beginning. As you know, I have sons that run track, cross country, we watch a lot of races. Let me tell you what happens at every race. At the beginning of every race, they're seeded based on their previous times. And at the beginning of the race, there's always some dude who's got the slowest time. He starts off, when the gun sounds, he takes off, man. He's out in front. He's digging. And that first lap, he's looking good. But he didn't realize there's 3 more to go for that mile. And then everybody starts passing him. Do you know what Solomon said? He said the end is better than the beginning. Because it's not about how you start the race, it's how you finish the race. It's not what place you were in the first lap, it's what place you were in at the last lap. And I see it every weekend when we go to races. I see this superlative in action. It's the end of the race that matters, not the beginning. Because you can start off well. Some of us started off well in our Christian life, but we ain't doing too good right now. And what Solomon's saying is, look, you need to start well, but you need to finish well. That's the important thing. How are you going to finish the race? There's an interesting story. We don't have time to read it. I think I'm going to do it in another series that I feel like God's like moving me to do. But it's so you might hear this again, like full story. But let me give you the story. 1 Kings chapter 13. This came up at our bro lunch yesterday, and it fits with what we're talking about. So there's this unidentified prophet. King Jeroboam is the king in Israel, and he's decided to prosper idolatry in the nation. So he's gone around from city to city, and he builds these altars so that idolatry will take place. So this unidentified prophet is told by God to go and tell him that he needs to tear down these altars. And so he prophesies against him. And Jeroboam kind of goes against him to begin with. And when he reaches out his hand, God strikes him and withers his hand. And so he then turns to the unidentified prophet and he says, hey, fix my hand. Would you ask God to fix my hand? So he asks God to fix his hand. He does. And in the process of that, the unidentified prophet says to Jeroboam, says, look, God told me to come here, prophesy to you, don't eat or drink anything, and go straight home. And so what the unidentified prophet does, he goes to Jeroboam, he says, look, this is what this is what the Lord says. So Jeroboam gets the message. So he went straight there. He didn't eat anything. He didn't drink anything. And then he starts on his way back. Well, on his way back, there's an older prophet in the town. He finds out about the unidentified prophet, so he goes to meet him on the road. He saddles up his donkey, he meets him. And when he finds him, he's sitting under a tree taking a break on his journey back home. And so the older prophet says to him, I want you to come to my house, and I want you to eat something. I want you to drink something. Have a meal with me. And the unidentified prophet says to him, God told me to come here, give this message. Don't eat or drink anything on the way and on the way back, and just go home. He said, so I can't do that. And then the older prophet says to him, well, the angel of the Lord told me that you should do this. And there's a lot more to this story, but I'm giving you the gist. And so the unidentified prophet, you know what he does? He goes to the older prophet's house, even though the older prophet was lying to him. Do you know what happens in the story? Is that unidentified prophet who was faithful to do what God had called him to do, he went to Jeroboam, he told him the message, he was on his way home. He was just about probably to get home. You know what he did? He got off track. He did not finish well. See, because it ain't about how you start the race, it's about how you finish the race. The end of the matter is better than the beginning. It's greater than the beginning because it's how we finish. Look through the pages of Scripture and you'll find all kinds of people who started off good with God, but then they fell off to the wayside because they could not keep in obedience. The unidentified prophet's problem was he knew what God had said, but he let his guard down. He got deceived, and he got mauled by a lion on the way home and died because he did not continue in obedience. And so what what Solomon's saying is this is the problem. In other words, he says, it's better to be patient in spirit than prideful in spirit. You know what it means to be patient in spirit? It means that I'm willing to wait on God. Prideful in spirit means I'll do it my way. Are you patient in spirit, waiting on God, or are you prideful and want to do it your way? Look, the whole mess that we are in humanity is because we are not willing to wait on God. When Eve and Adam ate from the tree, it's because they decided to do it their way rather than trust God. But if you go to the way our nations are set up, a lot of it goes back to one story. Abraham was given a promise that he'd have a kid, but his wife was barren, and years had gone by, and they thought, we'll never have a kid. So Sarah one day goes in and says, hey, honey, why don't you get our maidservant Hagar pregnant, and then God will give us a son through her. And then they got a son, and she regretted it. Sarah regretted it. She became jealous. And let's just be honest. If Sarah would have came to you and said, hey, God told us we we're going to have a baby. I've been barren. I'm getting way up in age. I don't think I'm going to have a kid. What do you think about this plan? What would you say to her? Sarah, you don't want to do that. There's a lot of problems with that. You're not going to really like your servant if she gets pregnant and you're not. And so then she goes to Abraham and says, you got to get rid of her. And so Abraham kicked her out. And that is the beginning of the descendants of Ishmael, which basically are the Arabic nations. That one choice is still being played out today. Why? Because someone was prideful in spirit rather than patient in spirit. See, it makes a difference whether you're patient or prideful in your spirit. And Solomon's saying it's better for you to be patient. And then verse 9. We'll really like this one because this is going to get convicting. Be not quick in your spirit to become angry. Why are you mad, bro? For, here's why. For anger lodges in the heart of fools. Are you slow to become angry? Are you quick? I mean, it even says in the New Testament, be slow to speak and slow to anger. And quick to what? Listen. Slow to anger. Slow to burn. So don't be hasty to get angry. Even when you might be right. Even when you have a right. Be slow to be angry. And I love the way that Solomon lays this out. He says, here's why. Because it'll lodge in your heart. It lodges in the heart of fools. It gets stuck in your heart. In other words, it lays down roots and it takes up a dwelling place in your emotions. Does it benefit you to be angry? No. What does Paul say? Don't let the sun go down on your anger. In other words, get past the anger quick as possible. Why? Because if you don't, you will allow bitterness to take root in your heart. And look, it may be one relationship that you have. That you got done wrong, man. You're mad about it. Somebody needs to pay for this. But here's the thing. When it lodges in your heart, it doesn't just affect that relationship. What it does is it begins to take root. And then every other relationship that you have will be affected by the anger that's taken up home in your heart. That's what he's warning you about. He's saying, look, you need to deal with anger so that it doesn't take over you and control you. You will either control your anger or it'll control you. That's why you say things like, why are you mad, bro? You got somebody in your life, he's like, they're always angry. Trish told me one time, you're angry a lot. And I was like, no, I ain't. I'm going to go ask my son. So I went to ask all three sons. Y'all think I'm angry? And they were like, yeah, you seem a lot angry. So I'm like, I think I'm angry. I got rebuked by my own kids and my wife. And I started looking inside going, like, what's bothering me? And I started figuring some things out. There's some things I need to let go of. there's some people I need to forgive. You know how you have to you deal with anger? You have to forgive people. And you go, I haven't forgiven them. You don't know what they've done. I know what you've done. I know what God did for you. He forgave you through Jesus Christ. So what exactly did they do that's worse than what you did to him? So you always have to go, Solomon doesn't talk about this because he didn't have quite that revelation at this point. But let's talk about it. So the reason you forgive is because you've been forgiven by Jesus. That's the basis. And look, you're not just forgiving them for their sake. You are forgiving people for your sake. Because if you don't, you know what's going to happen? Anger is going to take up a residence in your heart, and it's going to start seeping out of your heart into your other relationships. So don't let it get a home. Don't let the sun go down on it. It's daylight saving time. The sun's out longer. But deal with it. If you don't, and I can bring some of you up here right now and say, give me a testimony about how anger has benefited you. And I'll say this. It's a little extra. There is holy anger and unholy anger. So, and what I mean by that is, I can be angry because God's angry about it. That's holy anger. I mean, God gets mad about some things. He's slow to anger, but he gets mad about some things. So if something's happened and you're angry and God's angry about it, that's what I would say is holy anger. And that's what Paul says, be angry, but don't sin. It doesn't mean that you should never get angry. But a lot of things we get angry about, we shouldn't be angry about. We're just impatient. We don't get our way. So you getting mad because you don't get your way, it's not the same thing as holy anger. That's what we would call unholy anger. That's when we get mad about things that God don't get mad about. And let's just be honest. That's where a lot of our anger is. But here's the thing. Whether it's holy anger or it's unholy anger, you know what God's saying? Let it go. Don't repay evil for evil. Don't revile because you got reviled. Just because you're right doesn't make you right to respond in the wrong way. So how do I respond? I respond like Jesus did. That's how I respond. If it's holy anger, I have to forgive. If it's unholy anger, I need to forgive, but also I need to evaluate my anger and go, I probably should let that go because, I just didn't get my way. I get mad a lot because I didn't get my way. You people don't do what I want you to do. If y'all would just do what I want you to do, I wouldn't be mad. Y'all feel that? Y'all know that? Are y'all with me? All right. So here, verse 10, last verse. Say not, why were the former days better than these? For it is not from wisdom that you ask this. Don't live in the past. You got to live forward, not backwards. A lot of people living backwards, not forwards. It's not a sin to reminisce. It's good to know the past and learn from it. It's not good to live in it. Let me say it again. It's good to learn from the past, but it's not good to live in the past. Some of us still live in the past. We can't let it go. Reflection on the past, man, is good because you learn. But staying in it, staying on it, doesn't promote progress in our life. And typically, let's just be honest about the past, we're typically nostalgic about it. It means that we think about it more fondly than it really was. Longing for the good old days. Wishing things were like they used to be. And we do this. We really don't do ourselves a favor. And we usually do that during adversity and difficulty, don't we? Man, I just wish it was like it used to be. I wish we could go back to 1983. Do you really? I had somebody in church, because our churches, we try to be creative and use some things. And somebody tell me, I just wish church was like it was the 1980s. I'm like, I don't. Stop living in the past. It doesn't come from a heart of wisdom. You know, when there's difficulty and adversity in our life, we start looking at the past and we start complaining and griping. And we look at it and go, I just wish it was the way it used to be. But that doesn't help you as you go forward. That doesn't make life better for you. And that's what Solomon's saying. Have you ever thought this? Most of us have. Well, I just wish I'd have lived when Jesus lived. I just wish I'd have been in Israel, growing up in Israel, and got to know Jesus. Bull. You think you do. But I've been to your house, and you like air conditioning. And you like cars. It was hard when Jesus lived. Well, you say, well, I would have saw everything he did. You get told about it. Don't live in the past. You live in what God has done for you in the past, and you understand what he's done for you, and that helps you to move forward. God's moving forward. It's a new day. You know, we look back at things and go, man, if I'd just had better parents, if I'd have had more money, if I'd had more opportunity, things would be different. That doesn't help you to live forward in God's will. Matter of fact, it can be the very thing that's hampering you from moving forward because you're stuck in the past. U2 and Bono sang about it. Don't get stuck in the past. There's a story at the end of Deuteronomy chapter 34. And it's when Moses dies. Do you know what happened when Moses died? God buried him and they couldn't find his body. They knew the town, but they didn't know the place. You ever thought about, you may not even know that story, but I've thought about it. And it doesn't say why God didn't leave a place for them to know where Moses is buried, but here's why I think. Because the Israelites were like us, they're given to idolatry. And if they knew where Moses was buried, you know what they would do? They would do the same thing that we have done in our culture. The place where Jesus was born, the place where Jesus died, the place where he was buried, you know what? There's shrines there where we worship the place, not the person. And you know what the Israelites, I think he was stopping them from doing? If they would have known where Moses was buried, I think they would have started a town, and they'd have built a monument, and they would have stayed right there in the plains of Moab and never went to the promised land. And some of us are still back in the plains of Moab because we're stuck in our past, and we're not moving forward, and God's moving forward and saying, come, I've got something more for you, but you can't get past the past. And that's why he says, hey, look, why are you saying that former days are better? When the Israelites, here's how crazy we get. We get so nostalgic about the past and get stuck in it because we think about it so fondly. When the Israelites, you ever read the story? The Israelites, God had set them free by the plagues, and Pharaoh said, go. Moses took them and led them, and they got to the Red Sea, and there was a Red Sea here, and there were the Egyptians coming. They're like, I can see the clouds. They're coming to kill us. And you know what they said to Moses? Why did you bring us out here to die? Why did you take us to this place? They said this. They've been in slavery for 400 years. They said to Moses, it would be better for us to be back in slavery than to be here right now. And then when they got in the wilderness after the Red Sea, you know what they said to Moses on several occasions? We're out here starving to death. We're out here thirsting to death. It would be better that we were still slaves in Egypt. They thought about being slaves in Egypt in a positive manner. They had been there for 400 years. It was not good. And God had delivered them, but they were still stuck in the past. As soon as some adversity hit, as soon as some difficulty hit, instead of trusting God and moving forward, they were stuck in the past. As a matter of fact, they got so stuck that God left them in the wilderness for a generation. Because when they sent the spies in to go check out the promised land, 10 of them came back and said, these people are giants and we're like grasshoppers. And Joshua and Caleb, the other two, were like, dude, we can take them, man. We got the Lord on our side. That's the promised land. He's giving it to us. And they were like, no, it'd be better for us to stay out here. Because all of us have a tendency to stay in the past. And God's calling us to move on. God's calling us to grow. God's calling us to keep moving forward, to quit, keep on dreaming about what God can do with your life. So many people in the church, they get to a certain point in their life and they quit believing that God can use them to make a difference. And it doesn't matter if you're 30, 40, 50, 70. It doesn't matter if you're 100 years old. Moses and Abraham were old dudes, like 100 plus. And God was using their life. They were moving forward. So what's got you stuck? That God wants to free you from. Is there something holding you back that you can't let go of? You're just stuck in the moment. Man, if I really knew where Moses died, we'd build a monument. Build a statue of Moses. A golden statue. And that's not what God had for them. It's something so much better. So don't live in the past. See what God has in the future. Man, that's a lot of stuff. I don't know what lands on you. But like Solomon, that's why we only did 10 verses, because there's a lot there. So what I pray for you is the Spirit, as He does in my life, take the thing that He wants to say to you tonight and say, this is what I want to talk to you about. I want to talk to you about you've been living frivolously. And you need to take life more seriously. You got some anger issues I want to deal with. You got some past hurts and stuff in your life that's holding you back. I want to free you from it. What is it for you? What is it for you? May the Holy Spirit speak to your heart. Let's pray. Father, thank you for your word. Thank you that you tell us the truth, that you tell us what we need, even when we don't want to hear it. Father, in this time, as we gather together, there's much uncertainty in our world, probably as much as a lot of us can remember. Coronavirus and economic troubles and all these things weighing on our hearts and our mind and our community. Father, help us to know that you are sovereign over all things. Help us to know that your grace is enough for the moment. And help us to know that the gospel is real. It's because of what you did in the past that gives us hope for the future so that we can move forward. We do not have to be afraid, but we can walk in faith even when things don't look like we would like them to. That you're calling us out of the darkness into the light. You're calling us to live with a certain seriousness in life, although enjoying life, knowing that one day we'll stand before you and be held accountable for the things that we've done in this body. So help us to live wisely, not foolishly. Help us to walk in obedience, because obedience is a sign that we trust you.